Japanese cuisine to most North Americans equates to sushi and ramen, but this is just a fraction of the country's cuisine. There are Japanese curries, katsu, yakitori, teppanyaki, even elaborate French-inspired fine dining. I'm off to explore Japanese Izakaya cuisine and enjoy some sake and snacks. I'm at Kyo Kitchen Bar on Barrington Street in Halifax, halfway around the globe from Japan, but the food and sake will make you think you're in Tokyo. I'm sitting here with Emily, the restaurant manager of Kyo Izakaya Bar. So I'm going to guess, unless you've been living under a rock, that you're familiar with Japanese sushi, but you might not be familiar with this style of Japanese cuisine. So Emily, can you tell us a little bit about what is an Izakaya Bar?
Absolutely. So we still have a lot of guests come in and assume that we are a sushi bar just by virtue of being a Japanese restaurant. But an izakaya bar is more comparable to Japanese or Spanish tapas, where it's more of a bar food style, more casual, kind of shareable plates and so on and so forth.
And so if I was a customer to come in, I'm going to come, let's say, with a group of friends. Walk me through that kind of dining experience. How do I order at a bar? Is it the same like that? Do we just order a bunch of food for the table? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of different avenues that you can go down. If you are in a big group, it's perfect because everything is meant to be shareable. But we also have a lot of individuals come in, and we also specialize in ramen. So you can do a more individualized experience with the ramen, or you can either have 2 or 3 plates to yourself, just from our izakaya menu. So it really is flexible, but in essence, we really like to think of ourselves as a place where people come to gather. And the menu really reflects that and pushes people to, encourages people to share.
And one of the other strengths of here is the beverage program, right? So you're a mixologist, noted, and taken a lot of courses in sake. You're pretty darn close to being finishing your Psalm program. So, I mean, how does all that experience and how do you interweave that into the kind of the drink experience here? So what goes into your conscious thought in terms of what makes it onto a drink list?
Yeah, so it being an izakaya, it's a bar. So the drink side of things is hugely important, and we work very closely between our bar team and our kitchen team to make sure that the flavors are, collaborating or, they work well together for every menu. So we change things seasonally. And try and make sure that there's kind of a flow to the bar menu and the kitchen menu. For us, sake and cocktails are kind of our most important thing to us. I'm not really the mixologist anymore here. So fortunately, we have Daiki, who's our bar manager, and he is absolutely crushing our cocktail menu. We also do a collaborative menu amongst staff, so everyone can contribute to every menu, essentially. And then on the other side of things, instead of having a long wine list, we have a really long sake list, which is actually probably the largest on the East Coast right now, other than Quebec. But even then, I think we still have, a fighting chance at being the biggest, and maybe even the best.
Perfect. Okay, so in a second, we're going to have Emily walk us through a sake tasting, and later on, we're going to meet Ashley and talk a little bit about the food. So we mentioned before, one of the big parts of the experience at Kyo is sake, and who better to tell us a little bit about what sake is and maybe walk us through a flight is Emily. So Emily, you're on. Tell us a little bit about sake.
Yeah. Well, I always feel like the best way to get into these things is, what do you know about sake?
Well, I know it's a fermented rice beverage, so it has similarities between beer and wine.
Awesome. Well, a lot of people don't get that fermented part, right? A lot of people compare it more to wine, but it is definitely more comparable to beer brewing. As you take the rice and you're basically fermenting that with something called koji, Now, koji is used in a bunch of different aspects of Japanese cuisine, but for sake, it's basically a moldy rice, and that gives the enzymatic kickstart to the fermentation. So the result is something that looks more like wine, but there's so many different variations. A lot of people kind of start off at the bottom of the barrel, like, the Coors Light of sake, if you will, and get a kind of bad impression. So that's what we try to do here, is really show that there is an elevated version of sake that is much more enjoyable.
Okay,
so I'll take you through.
Walk us through.
Yeah. So our very first one, I'm going to walk you through what's called our one-step more flight. So we have a starter flight, but this is showing a bit more premium and refined styles. So everything that we're having here today, we've specially imported and carefully selected to showcase all the things that sake can be. So our very first one is called Kojima Shoten Toko Junmai Genshu. Now, I know that is like a mouthful word, but essentially it's a really recognized producer. I think it's like 10 generations old. And what they specialize in is kind of a ginjo style. So ginjo means that it is going to be a premium style. And how they determine the premiumness of sake is how much the rice grain initially is polished down. So if you think of it like polishing a rock, like the closer you get to the center, the more starch you're going to extract and the more clean and crisp flavors you get. So those kind of like introductory sakes, the bulk production.
Very little polishing, I'm going to guess.
Very little polishing, yeah. Along with a bunch of other things that happen in the process. But, that is kind of the starting point that determines the rest of the process.
Okay. So what should we expect out of this one?
Yeah. So this guy is going to have a bit of elevated alcohol. So a Genshu is actually an undiluted version. Now, it's not like you're going to have a 40% alcohol product, but it's going to sit at around 16% instead of something more like 14%. So the aromatics are going to be a bit more lifted. You're going to get a lot of fruit and floral from it.
Definitely.
Very clean.
Okay. And then do you pair that with anything in the menu, or is it to be paired?
Yeah. So we really like to pair this with something that is lower in spice, just because that elevated alcohol, it might play off each other in an intense way. So something that is definitely more delicate, something that won't overpower it, such as vegetable tempura or even the dumplings that we're going to have today.
Perfect.
Would be a great pairing. The one I'm really excited to show you is the Tamano Hikari Yamahai Classic. So there's essentially two traditional ways of making sake. There's the Kimocho style, and that's where you're basically leaving out the addition of lactic acid, and you're doing that manually. So it's very labor intensive, but fortunately, a few hundred years later into the beginning of sake making, they figured out how to make it a bit more profitable, less labor intensive, and this is the result. So the difference between these two are,
it's extreme on the nose, right?
Exactly. So this one we like to call an umami bomb, right? Similar to some wines, this one is very umami driven, has those like mushroom, soy notes. So this one you can pair with steak, something like
it does really come out of the glass with lots of that real earth-driven kind of aromatics.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
All right, so our following one, this is the Handaga Kobo 1801. Now, another big aspect to sake production is the yeast that they use. Now, I know there's a lot of talk about this in beer. Different yeast strains are going to produce different qualities, but in sake, it's especially important. And this product specifically highlights the yeast called 1801. So It's a non-foaming yeast, and it was really the benchmark for how you produce ginjo styles. So that's premium styles of sake. So this producer really wanted to say, like, hey, look, yeast is a very important factor. It's not all about rice polish. You know, you can polish it down to 1%, and that's still not going to give you everything that you might want out of the product. So,
and this is again unique again in its aromatics. You know, you had that really fruit forward one, really earthy, and then what's coming out of this one, because it's different again.
Yeah, this one I find is a bit more restrained, but really delicate. And I'll steal your word, blousy.
Okay.
Yeah, of its very plush in the mouthfeel as well. So this one I think is a great sipper on its own. You could drink this all night.
Perfect.
Now our final one, this is the Asahi Shuzo Dasai 45. So if you're at all familiar with the sake world, you've probably heard of Dasai before. They are like the Ferrari of sake companies. They do everything the best and the boldest. They only produce what's called a dai ginjo style. So dai ginjo is that next step from a ginjo style, and they produce different levels. So this is kind of the introductory one. The 45 stands for they have polished it down to 45% of the polishing ratio. A dai ginjo only needs to be polished down to 50%, but they want that extra 5%. And they go all the way down to 23% in some of their other products. So this one is very finessed. It just has so many beautiful qualities to it.
I love this one.
Yeah.
It's got like pear and little floor. It's wow. It's really pretty and really well made.
I think pretty is the perfect word. And when people come to us and they say, oh, I tried sake once, I hate it. This is what I just want to show them, because this is what sake can be. And, it's so much more than that. So.
Yeah, so this is a great experience for myself, because this is a totally new way for me to enjoy sake. And it's such beautiful balance on the palate. Like, this is one incredible. There's none of that, any worry about that burn. This one has a seductiveness on the palate too. It's really a beautiful product. So Emily, thanks for walking us through sake. So now I have the pleasure of speaking with Ashley Mackinnon, and Ashley kind of manages the back end of the restaurant, the kitchen. And Ashley, when it comes to putting something on the menu or coming up with the menu, what's the philosophy of the restaurant? Like, do you start with thinking of classic Japanese dishes first and then working out, or I know you use a lot of local too, so is it the ingredient first? How do you kind of rationalize that, and what inspires you to put something on a menu?
Absolutely. So we actually do a little bit of both. Authenticity is very important to us here, so we do a lot of research to make sure that what we're proposing makes sense. And then secondarily, we look at what's available locally, what's in season, to make sure that we have the best flavor that we could possibly offer when we present a dish.
And what I was intrigued about, I know that, a lot of the population's moving to more plant-based diets, lighter styles. And I noticed that in your menus, there's quite a bit of vegetarian cuisine incorporated into what you do here. Is that part again like of the philosophy of the cuisine style, or is it more of a kind of a choice of the restaurant to kind of put a lot of vegetarian items?
So classically Japanese food is very vegetarian, just by virtue of what it is that Woshoku food entails. And then Yoshoku, which is a food that was introduced to Japan after Edo, so in Meiji, is more heavily meat-based from Western influence. So it's easy to kind of draw from both of those styles of cuisine and be able to supply delicious options that are friendly to all sorts of different dietary needs.
Perfect. Okay, so we're gonna, in a second, you're gonna craft a dish. Tell me a little bit about the dish.
Yeah, so we're going to make some mushroom gyoza. So gyoza, or more colloquially pot stickers, are a dumpling that is classically filled with meat, but we're going to do it with a beautiful medley of Japanese mushrooms.
Okay, I'm excited to try this out, so gonna come back. So we're back from the kitchen. Ashley's prepared these amazing gyoza filled with mushrooms, mirin, a little bit of sake, a little bit of soy sauce, some sesame oil, some chives. Only thing left to do, well, if it's you need to come down to Barrington Street in Halifax to come into Kyo and try it out for yourself. But for me, the last thing to do is say cheers, thanks to Emily and Ashley, and I'm gonna go in for a bite. So anyway, be jealous.